The cold wind of the dead moon cut through Sarvan's protective suit as she stood at the edge of the excavation site, and she could not stop staring at what her team had found beneath the volcanic rock. For 300 years, the Valorian Dominion had ruled the stars without question and without challenge. And Sarvan had spent her entire career digging through the bones of civilizations that had fallen before her people's might. But nothing in all her years of work had prepared her for this discovery. The structure was massive, a ring of dark metal that stretched nearly a kilometer across, and it sat in a crater that her team had spent 6 months carving out of the frozen ground. And every sensor, every scanner, every piece of equipment they had brought to this forgotten moon had failed to explain what it was made of or how it had come to be here. Prelat Sarvan called her assistant Varth, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly in the way that meant he was nervous. The analysis teams have completed their preliminary reports, and I think you need to see this. Sarvan turned away from the ring and walked toward the temporary research station, her boots crunching on the gray dust that covered everything on this lifeless world. And when she entered the heated chamber and removed her helmet, she could see the fear on the faces of her team. Vorath handed her a tablet displaying the results of their material analysis, and Sarvan felt her blood run cold as she read the data. The metal of the ring did not match anything in the Dominion's database. Not any alloy they had ever created, not any material they had ever encountered in 3 centuries of conquest. "There is more," Vorath said quietly, and he led her to another screen where the linguistic team had been working for weeks on the strange symbols that covered the ring's surface. "We finally cracked the code, and the message is unlike anything we expected." Sarvan read the translation that appeared on the screen, and she had to read it 3 times before the words made sense to her mind. "This gate is sealed by order of the Terran Exodus fleet. To those who find it, know that we are not gone and we are not forgotten. When the stars align and the signal calls, we will return. Pray you are worthy of what comes next." "Who are the Terrans?" Sarvan asked, and her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Will you not know?" Vorath answered, his scales shifting to a pale shade that showed his unease. "There is no record of any species by that name in our archives, no mention of any Exodus fleet, no explanation for why this structure exists or who built it." Sarvan walked back outside and stood before the ring once more. And now the massive structure seemed different to her. Not just ancient ruins, but something alive, something waiting. The warning carved into its surface was not the boast of a dead civilization, she realized, but a promise made by something that intended to keep it. She contacted the High Council of the Dominion that very night, sending her report through the fastest communication channels available. And within a week, a fleet of ships arrived at the moon carrying scientists, military officers, and representatives of the ruling families. Grand Marshal Thivik was the first to descend from the lead vessel, his ceremonial armor gleaming in the light of the distant sun. And he walked to the edge of the crater with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. "So this is what has caused such excitement among my archaeologists," he said, and his voice carried the dismissive tone that Sarvan had learned to expect from military leaders. "A ring of metal with a threatening message left behind by some species that no longer exists." "With respect, Grand Marshal," Sarvan replied carefully, "we do not know that they no longer exist. The message speaks of return, and the technology here is far beyond anything we have ever seen." Thevik laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the crater, and he turned to face Sarvan with amusement in his eyes. "Every dead civilization leaves behind warnings and promises," he said. "They carve their final words into stone and metal, hoping that someone will remember them. But they are still dead, Prelate, and their warnings mean nothing to those of us who still live." He ordered his scientists to study the ring and find a way to activate it, believing that whatever technology it contained would make the Dominion even more powerful. and Servan could only watch as teams of researchers swarmed over the ancient structure, attaching cables and sensors and devices designed to unlock its secrets. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, and slowly the scientists began to understand how the ring worked. It was not just a monument or a marker, they discovered, but an actual gateway, a portal that could connect 2 points in space across distances that would take ordinary ships centuries to travel. The High Council grew excited at this news, imagining the military advantages of instant travel across the galaxy. And they pushed the scientists to work faster, to find the activation sequence, to open the gate and claim whatever treasures waited on the other side. Sorvan alone urged caution, and she alone seemed to remember the warning that the builders had left behind. But her voice was small against the chorus of ambition and greed that drove the Dominion forward. "We do not know who built this," she told the council in her final report before she was removed from the project. "We do not know why they left or where they went. But they wanted us to find this gate, and they wanted us to read their warning. Perhaps we should listen before we act." The council thanked her for her service and sent her away, and the excavation continued without her. And deep beneath the surface of the moon, in the heart of the ancient ring, something that had slept for 10,000 years began to stir. For the builders had indeed wanted their gate to be found, and they had designed it to wait until the right moment to reveal its true purpose. The Valorian Dominion thought they were uncovering a relic of the past, but they were actually awakening the future. And soon, very soon, they would learn what it truly meant to face the ones who had left that warning carved in metal that could survive the death of stars. The galaxy was about to change forever, and no one except Servan seemed to understand that change was not always something to be welcomed. Servan had been dismissed from the excavation project, but she could not forget what she had seen, and the warning carved into that ancient ring haunted her dreams every night. The High Council had told her to return to her normal duties, to forget about the mysterious gate and the species that had built it. But Servan was an archaeologist, and her entire life had been devoted to understanding the past, and she knew that the past always held the keys to the future. She began her investigation in secret, using her credentials to access databases that most citizens of the Dominion did not even know existed. And after weeks of searching through files and records, she found a mention of something called the Forbidden Archives. The Forbidden Archives were located on a station orbiting a dying star at the edge of Dominion space, and they contained records of every species the Valorians had conquered or destroyed during their rise to power. But more importantly, they contained records that the High Council had ordered erased from all public databases. Sorvan traveled to the station under a false identity, claiming to be a historical researcher studying ancient military campaigns. And the guards at the entrance barely glanced at her credentials before allowing her inside. The archives were massive, stretching through dozens of levels carved into an asteroid that had been hollowed out centuries ago. And the air inside was cold and dry, designed to preserve the ancient records that filled every room and corridor. Sorvan spent days searching through the files, looking for any mention of the Terrans or the Exodus fleet. And at first, she found nothing, as if the species had been deliberately erased from history. But she was patient and thorough, and eventually she discovered a hidden section of the archives that required special codes to access. And using skills she had learned during her years of archaeological work, she managed to bypass the security and enter the restricted area. What she found inside changed everything she thought she knew about the galaxy and the Dominion's place in it. The file spoke of a species called humans, who had come from a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. And according to the records, these humans had been a minor civilization when the Valorians first encountered them, barely capable of traveling between the worlds of their own solar system. The ancient Valorians had dismissed them as insignificant, Just another primitive species to be conquered and absorbed into the growing empire. But something had happened that the records described only in fragments and broken sentences, as if whoever had written them could not believe what they were recording. The humans had learned, the file said. They had adapted and evolved and changed faster than any species the Valorians had ever encountered. And within just 200 years, they had gone from primitives to equals, and then to something more. Sylvan read with growing amazement about how the humans had formed alliances with species that the Valorians had dismissed as worthless. How they had taken technology from their enemies and improved it within months. How they had fought wars with a passion and fury that terrified even the most hardened Valorian warriors. One file described a battle where a single human ship had held off an entire Valorian fleet for 3 days, buying time for civilian transports to escape. And when the ship had finally been destroyed, the Valorians had found recordings of the crew singing songs and laughing as if they welcomed death in service of their cause. Another file spoke of human diplomats who had convinced 12 different species to join their alliance in a single year. Species that had been enemies for centuries, united by the strange charisma of these small, fragile beings from an insignificant world. But the most important file was the one that described the war, the great conflict between the Valorian hegemony and the human alliance. And Sylvan read with horror about the losses her ancestors had suffered at the hands of these supposedly inferior creatures. The human counteroffensive resulted in the loss of 40% of hegemony military forces in 18 standard months. The file read, "Recommend immediate cessation of hostilities and territorial concession. The humans cannot be defeated through conventional means, and continued conflict will result in the destruction of the hegemony itself." The war had ended with the Valorians surrendering territory and signing treaties that limited their expansion. And for a time, the humans and the Valorians had existed in an uneasy peace, watching each other across the stars. But then something strange had happened, something that the files could not explain. The humans had begun to leave, abandoning their colonies and their stations and their worlds. And within a decade, they had vanished completely, taking with them every ship and every citizen, leaving behind only the sealed portals with their mysterious warnings. No one knew why they had left or where they had gone. The files contained only speculation and theories, none of which made any sense to Sylvan. Some believed that the humans had discovered something terrible in the depths of space, something that had forced them to flee. Others thought they had simply grown tired of the constant conflicts and had sought a new home far from the wars of the known galaxy. But there was one final file that caught Sylvan's attention, a fragment of a transmission that had been intercepted as the last human ships departed known space. "We leave now to grow beyond what we are," the message read. "When we return, we will be worthy of the stars. Wait for us." Sylvan sat in the darkness of the archives for a long time after reading those words, and she understood now why the warning on the portal had not been a threat. The humans had not fled in defeat or fear. They had left because they knew they needed to change, to become something better than what they were. And they had left the portals behind as a promise that they would return when they were ready. And now the Dominion was trying to activate one of those portals. And Sylvan knew with terrible certainty that the activation would send a signal, a call that would echo across the void and tell the humans that it was time to come home. She gathered every file she could carry and fled the archives, determined to warn someone, anyone, about what was coming. But even as she ran, she knew in her heart that it was already too late. The Dominion had spent centuries erasing the humans from history, convincing themselves that they were the supreme power in the galaxy. But the truth had been waiting in the darkness all along, and soon that truth would return to judge them. Sylvan only hoped that when the humans finally came back, they would remember that not everyone in the Dominion had forgotten how to fear. The day the portal activated, Sorvan was on a transport ship heading back to the Dominion capital, carrying the forbidden files that proved the humans were real and that they would return. But she was too late to stop what was about to happen. On the frozen moon, the Dominion Science Division had finally cracked the activation sequence, and Grand Marshal Thevik himself stood in the observation chamber, watching as his scientists prepared to unlock the secrets of the ancient gate. "Begin the activation," Thevik commanded, and his voice was filled with the arrogance of someone who believed he controlled the most powerful force in the galaxy. The scientists entered the final codes, and the ring began to glow with a light that seemed to come from somewhere beyond normal space. And for a moment, everyone in the chamber held their breath, waiting for the portal to open and reveal the path to unimaginable power. But the portal did not open. Instead, it released a pulse of energy so powerful that it knocked every person in the chamber to the ground. And the pulse did not stop at the walls of the research station, but continued outward into space, faster than any ship could travel, piercing through dimensions that the Dominion scientists had never even imagined. The signal lasted for exactly 1 standard hour, and then the portal went dark and cold as if it had never been activated at all. Dovik screamed at his scientists, demanding to know what had gone wrong, and the scientists scrambled to analyze the data, trying to understand why the portal had not opened as they expected. It was not designed to be a doorway, one of the lead researchers finally reported, her voice shaking with fear. It was designed to be a beacon, a signal that would travel across impossible distances. "And we just turned it on." Thevik ordered the portal destroyed, but the Dominion's most powerful weapons barely scratched its surface. The metal that humans had used to build, it was stronger than anything the Valorians had ever created, and no amount of firepower could damage it. The High Council convened an emergency meeting, and for days they debated what to do. But in the end, they convinced themselves that the signal meant nothing, that the humans were long dead, and that there was no reason to fear a species that had vanished 10,000 years ago. 6 months passed, and life in the Dominion returned to normal. Ships traveled between worlds, merchants traded goods, and the military continued its endless campaigns to expand the Empire's borders. And slowly, the incident with the portal was forgotten by everyone except Sorvan. She had been branded a dissident after trying to warn the Council about what she had found in the archives. And now she lived in exile on a remote colony world, watching the stars and waiting for the signs she knew would come. The first sign appeared without warning. A patrol ship disappeared at the edge of Dominion space, and at first the military assumed it had been destroyed by pirates or raiders. But when they sent a fleet to investigate, they found no wreckage, no debris, no evidence that the ship had ever existed. Then more ships began to vanish. Freighters, scouts, and even warships simply disappeared from sensors and were never seen again. And the military commanders who tried to explain these losses found themselves unable to provide any answers. Deep space sensors began detecting massive energy signatures in the void between galaxies, sources of power that should not have existed, moving in patterns that suggested intelligence and purpose. And the scientists who studied these readings reported that the energy signatures were getting closer. On a dozen worlds scattered across the galaxy, ancient portals that had been dormant for millennia suddenly came to life, humming with power and glowing with that same strange light that had appeared on the frozen moon. And the Dominion forces stationed near these portals reported hearing sounds coming from within the rings. Sounds that might have been voices or might have been something else entirely. The High Council finally summoned Savan from her exile, bringing her to the capital in chains like a criminal. And they demanded to know what was happening, as if she had caused these events rather than merely predicted them. "You activated the beacon," Sovan told them, standing before the assembled rulers of the Dominion with her head held high. "You sent a signal across the void, and the humans heard it. After 10,000 years of silence, the Terran Exodus fleet is coming home. The council demanded proof, and Sylvan showed them the file she had taken from the Forbidden's archives. She showed them the records of the war, the descriptions of human capabilities, and the final message the humans had sent as they departed known space. "We leave now to grow beyond what we are," she quoted, and her voice echoed through the silent chamber. "When we return, we will be worthy of the stars. Wait for us." They left because they knew they needed to change, Sylvan continued. They knew they had become too angry, too violent, too consumed by the wars your ancestors forced them to fight. And they left the portals behind as a promise that they would return when they were ready. "And now," she said, pointing at the council with a hand that did not tremble, "you have called them back before their time, and you will face whatever they have become." The council dismissed her again, refusing to believe that any species could survive 10,000 years in the void between galaxies. But they could not ignore the evidence that something was approaching, something vast and powerful and completely unknown. Military fleets were mobilized across the Dominion, positioned near every active portal and every strategic location. And the people of 1,000 worlds looked up at the stars and wondered what was coming. Sorvan was sent back to her exile, but this time she went willingly, for she knew that the coming days would bring either destruction or transformation, and she wanted to be as far from the capital as possible when the humans finally arrived. The signal had been sent, and the signal had been heard. And now the galaxy could only wait for the answer that was traveling across the impossible darkness between stars. The Terran Exodus fleet was coming home, and nothing in the Dominion would ever be the same again. The portal above Velaris Prime, the throne world of the Dominion, had been dormant for 10,000 years. But on the day the humans returned, it blazed to life with a light so bright that it could be seen from the surface of the planet below. Grand Marshal Thivik stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the portal with a mixture of fear and defiance. Around him, 10,000 warships of the Dominion fleet formed a defensive wall, their weapons charged and ready to destroy whatever emerged from the ancient gate. "Nothing can survive in the void between galaxies," Thevik told his officers, trying to convince himself as much as them. "Whatever is coming through that portal, we will crush it and prove that the Dominion is the supreme power in this galaxy." The portal pulsed once, twice, 3 times, and then something began to emerge. It was not a warship. It was a city. The vessel that came through the portal was so vast that it blocked out the stars behind it, and its surface was covered with green growing things, with lights that twinkled like a constellation given solid form, with structures that seemed to have been grown rather than built. Behind the first ship, more vessels poured through the portal. Carriers and cruisers and support ships of designs that the Dominion's computers could not identify. And each one was beautiful in a way that Thevik had never seen in a weapon of war. The Dominion fleet sensors went wild, trying to calculate the power output of the incoming vessels. And the numbers they reported were so high that many officers assumed the sensors must be malfunctioning. A transmission cut through every frequency, overwhelming the Dominion's communication systems with its clarity and power. "This is Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the Terran Return Fleet. We have traveled far and remember much. We come not as conquerors, but we will not be subjugated. We seek only to reclaim what was ours and to know what has become of the galaxy we left behind. Respond with peace, and peace you shall have." The voice was calm and warm, speaking in a language that the translation systems identified as human standard. And there was no threat in the words, only a simple statement of fact and an offer of friendship. On Velaris Prime, the High Council convened an emergency session. And for once, they were truly afraid, facing a power that they could not dismiss or ignore. Some of the counselors urged negotiation, pointing out that the human message had been peaceful and that there might be a way to avoid conflict. But others, led by Grand Marshal Thevik through his communication link from the fleet, demanded immediate attack. "We cannot show weakness," Thevik argued. "If we negotiate from a position of fear, the humans will know that they can take whatever they want. We must strike first and prove that the Dominion will not bow to anyone." The council voted, and by a narrow margin, they chose war. Thevik smiled as he received the order, and he turned to face the human fleet with the confidence of a commander who had never known defeat. "All ships," he commanded, "open fire." 10,000 Dominion warships unleashed their weapons at the same moment, sending a storm of energy and missiles toward the human vessels. And for a moment, space itself seemed to burn with the fury of the attack. But when the light faded, the human ships remained untouched. Shields of a type the Dominion had never seen had absorbed every weapon, every missile, every beam of destructive energy. And the massive city ship at the center of the human formation had not even bothered to raise its defenses, as if the entire attack was beneath its notice. "Return fire," Admiral Tanaka's voice came through the communication systems, and there was sadness in her words. "Disable their weapons and engines. Do not destroy. Do not kill." The human fleet responded with precision that seemed almost supernatural. Beams of golden light lanced out from the human ships, striking Dominion vessels with perfect accuracy. But instead of explosions, there was simply silence, as weapons went offline and engines stopped functioning and ships drifted powerless in the void. Thevik watched in horror as his fleet was dismantled around him, ship after ship falling silent without a single casualty. And when the golden beams finally struck his flagship, he felt the vibration of systems shutting down throughout the vessel. The battle lasted 11 minutes. When it ended, not a single human ship had been damaged. The Dominion fleet, the most powerful military force in the known galaxy, drifted helpless in the void, their crews alive and unharmed but completely unable to continue fighting. Admiral Tanaka sent a second message, and this time her voice carried the weight of 10,000 years of wandering and 10,000 years of growth. "We did not return to make war. We returned because this galaxy was our home and we wished to see it thrive. Your empire was built on conquest and fear, and we have seen where that path leads. We offer you a choice now, the same choice we once had to make ourselves. Join us in building something better," Tanaka continued, "in creating a galaxy where species cooperate rather than conquer, where strength is used to protect rather than destroy. Or be remembered as a cautionary tale, a warning to future civilizations about the dangers of pride and violence. You have one solar cycle to decide. We will wait, as we have waited for 10,000 years. But understand this, we will not wait forever, and we will not allow the suffering we once knew to continue." The transmission ended, and the Dominion was left in silence. On Velaris Prime, the High Council stared at each other in shock, unable to comprehend what had just happened. They had sent their greatest fleet against the humans, and the humans had defeated them without killing a single person. This was not the victory of a brutal conqueror. This was something else entirely, a demonstration of power so complete that it did not need to destroy, a mercy so vast that it seemed almost like a challenge. The Dominion had one day to choose its future, and for the first time in 300 years, they faced a decision that truly mattered. And somewhere in the void, on a disabled flagship that drifted among the wreckage of his ambitions, Grand Marshal Thevik stared at the human city ship and finally understood what it meant to face a species that had learned to be worthy of the stars. Sorvan had never expected to stand on a human ship, but here she was, walking through corridors of living metal and breathing air that smelled like forests and flowers. The High Council had sent her as their representative, partly because she was the only person in the Dominion who had studied the humans, and partly because they hoped that if things went wrong, Her death would not matter to anyone important. But Servan did not care about their reasons, because she finally had the chance to understand the species that had haunted her dreams since she first read their warning. The human city ship was called the Wanderer's Hope, and it was more beautiful than anything Servan had ever seen. Its walls were covered with plants from 1,000 worlds. Its corridors were filled with light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. And its people walked with the calm confidence of those who had seen the worst the universe could offer, and had chosen to be better. What surprised Servan most was that the humans were not alone. As she walked through the ship, she saw species that she recognized from the extinction records in the Forbidden Archives. Species that the ancient Valorians had wiped out, somehow alive and thriving in the company of their human friends. She saw the Kethra, whose homeworld had been burned to ash 3,000 years ago, now tending gardens that grew in zero gravity. She saw the Vorlani, whose entire civilization had been enslaved and worked to death, now teaching classes to children of a dozen different species. She saw the memories of the fallen, holographic reconstructions of species that had been completely destroyed, preserved by human technology so that their knowledge and culture would never be truly lost. The humans had not fled the galaxy to escape. They had fled to preserve, to protect, to give sanctuary to those who had nowhere else to go. Sorten was still trying to understand this when she was brought before Admiral Yuki Tanaka. The Admiral was old, older than any human in the ancient records, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of centuries. But she smiled warmly when Servan entered her quarters, and she gestured for the Valorian to sit in a chair that adjusted itself to fit her body perfectly. "You are the archaeologist," Tanaka said, and her voice was gentle despite everything she had witnessed. "You are the one who found our portal and tried to warn your people about what was coming." "I am," Servan answered, and she found herself unable to look away from the Admiral's eyes. "I spent months studying your people, reading records that my government tried to erase, and I still do not understand why you came back." Tanaka nodded slowly, as if she had expected this question. 10,000 years ago, she began, "we left this galaxy because we were becoming something terrible. We had fought so many wars, lost so many friends, done so many things that haunted us. And we knew that if we stayed, we would become exactly like the empires that had tried to destroy us." She stood and walked to a window that showed the stars outside, and Servan saw the curve of a Valorian colony world hanging in the darkness. "We left to heal," Tanaka continued, "to grow beyond our anger and our pain, to learn how to be strong without being cruel, and to gather those who had been lost, the species your ancestors destroyed, so that they could have a second chance. The warning on our portals was not a threat to you," she said, turning back to face Servan. "It was a promise to ourselves, a reminder that we would return, and that when we did, we had to be worthy of it." Servan thought about the battle she had witnessed, the way the human weapons had disabled rather than destroyed, and she began to understand. "You could have killed them all," she said quietly. "Our entire fleet, our military leadership, everyone who stood against you. But you chose not to. We chose to show them what we had learned," Tanaka agreed. "That true strength is not the ability to destroy, but the ability to choose not to. That victory is meaningless if it requires you to become the thing you once fought against." The Admiral sat down across from Servan and leaned forward with an intensity that made the Valorians' hearts beat faster. "Your Dominion has one day to choose," Tanaka said. "And some of your leaders will choose war, because that is all they know. But many will choose peace, because they have seen what war against us would cost. And in time, your people will learn what we learned, that the galaxy is too vast and too beautiful to be ruled by fear." "What happens now?" Servan asked, and she realized that she was not afraid of the answer. "Now we rebuild," Tanaka said with a smile. We open the portals that have been closed for 10,000 years. We welcome home the species that have been wandering in the void. And we create a galaxy where every civilization can grow and thrive, protected by those who have the strength to protect. Your dominion will not fall, she added. It will change, slowly at first, and then faster as your people see what is possible. Some will resist, and we will contain them without cruelty. But most will embrace the future, because the future we offer is better than anything they have known. In the years that followed, Sorvin watched the Admiral's words come true. The Dominion fractured, but it did not collapse. The warriors who chose violence were captured and rehabilitated, taught new ways of using their strength. And the leaders who chose peace found themselves building something greater than any empire. Species that had been extinct returned to their homeworlds, welcomed by Valorians who wept with shame and joy. Knowledge that had been lost was restored. And the galaxy, which had been divided by fear for so long, began to heal. Sorvin eventually returned to the moon where it all began, to the portal that had sent the signal across the void. And she found that the warning had been changed. Below the original human text, new words had been carved in a dozen languages, including her own. They returned. And we were made better for it. She stood before the portal for a long time, remembering the fear she had felt when she first read the warning, and the hope she felt now. And she understood at last what the humans had truly given the galaxy. Not conquest, not domination, but a second chance. The same chance they had given themselves when they fled into the darkness 10,000 years ago. The Terran Exodus fleet had come home, and they had brought the future with them.